the quicker people recognize that Israel's ultimate goal here is genocide, the easier this conversation will be for many of you. I think a lot of people still don't want to believe that like America's close ally would ever be so openly, so actively doing an ethnic cleansing campaign.
The Israeli airstrikes began shortly after 2 a.m., wave after wave across Gaza, and then backed up by tank artillery and fire from naval ships off the coast.
We were sleeping when suddenly, like a volcanic eruption, the strikes rained down, taking out children.
The Israeli airstrikes and the number of dead continued to rise through the day. During the ceasefire, Gazans had started to rebuild what was left of their lives after more than 15 months of war. But many feared that this moment was inevitable. Israel has issued evacuation orders for parts of Gaza. Palestinians who'd returned home in recent weeks are now being forced back to humanitarian zones. It is perhaps a prelude to a ground invasion. Benjamin Netanyahu met with his key security officials hours after he gave the orders to resume the war. Outside the Israeli parliament, an anti-government protest.
Yeah, there's already an anti-government protest that was launching against Netanyahu. Netanyahu had some internal drama with the head of the Shin Bet. He fired the head of the Shin Bet. And yesterday he was supposed to have he was supposed to be called in to answer. There was an inquiry related to why he fired the head of the Shin Bet. And of course, you know, classic Netanyahu, only one speed, turned around and used this as an opportunity, used punishing innocent Gazans as an opportunity to move the conversation away from, is it effing again a lot? I don't know why it's just happening. I'm gonna have to see. Don't worry, I'll figure it out. All right. Anyway, basically, this is a win-win for him, where all the conversations stop because everybody has to stop because all of a sudden the war is back on, right? The war. It's not a war, it's a genocide. No more inquiries about why he fired the Shin Bet guy. No more, and now he can bring back Itamar Ben-Gvir to the coalition as well, to get more support from the far right, the even further right in Israel. It's a fantastic opportunity for him.
Protest gathered to oppose the airstrikes. 59 hostages remain in Gaza, 24 of them thought to be alive. Renewed fighting could put their lives at risk.
I think nothing good will come from renewing the war and the fight. Not for the innocent people living in Gaza, not for the hostages there under the tunnels, nothing.
Many Israelis believe that Netanyahu has deliberately collapsed the ceasefire for his own political survival and to ensure that his coalition remains intact.
This protest is pretty small, let's be honest, maybe 100 people or so. And it's hard to say whether or not the views expressed here reflect the majority of Israeli views. But a lot of people in Israel, it's safe to say, are quite skeptical about the reasons Israel is returning to fighting.
Hamas hasn't yet carried out counterattacks against Israel. They say they're working with mediators to prevent an escalation. But Israel has said it is ready to increase its attacks. And for now, they have the White House's backing.
The end of the ceasefire in Gaza. Israel launched extensive strikes across the Gaza Strip overnight. Chief Global Affairs anchor Martha Raddatz is tracking the latest from Washington. Good morning, Martha.
Good morning, George. There had been hope for the release of the remaining hostages, hope that the ceasefire could hold. But this morning, make no mistake, a major Israeli assault on Hamas is once again underway.
Yeah, major Israeli assault on Hamas. What an incredible way to frame Israel's genocide over and over and over again. It is always the same. This is why I think Western outlets are also morally culpable for the continuation of this genocide. They are misinforming their audiences deliberately. Okay? 400 plus dead, killed. 400 plus killed, majority women and children. 180 plus children. And these guys are like, oh yeah, it's an assault on Hamas. And then when you question them, when you're like, what do you mean it's an assault on Hamas? It's just like mostly women and children they killed. They'll turn around and say, oh, it's because Hamas is hiding under children, hiding under kids. They're using kids as human shields. An insane concept that is always unaddressed. Like, what do you mean? And what's interesting about it is that while some on the Israeli side are disputing the numbers immediately and saying 400, that's a lie, Israel's own outlets are claiming that they killed 400 enemy combatants. So they actually don't dispute the number of the dead. They just say they're all enemy combatants. Israel claims to have killed a handful of mid-level administrative officials in Gaza, not even combatants, in last night's massacre that killed over 400 people. At least 73% of those killed were women and children or the elderly. There is no justification, no conceivable rationale for this scale of slaughter, especially when Israel agreed to and signed a ceasefire deal that would see all the hostages released, and Hamas has already agreed to relinquish governing authority in Gaza. But of course, it's not about Hamas or the hostages in it. That should be clear at this point. Reminder, as the governing body in Gaza, Hamas has both the political and military wings, civilians and combatants, but Israel considers anyone on the public payroll in Gaza to be legitimate targets, from municipality officials to hospital administrators to street cleaners. Absurd. Yeah. There's a civilian police force. They've executed members of the civilian police force for the crime of actually organizing and bringing about some order to the humanitarian aid drops. They did that the day after people were receiving humanitarian aid, the limited amount that was entering into Gaza, in a single file line. Hamas, they're all Hamas. Source, I don't know, go F yourself. They killed Abu Hamza, Hamas spokesperson? No, he wasn't a Hamas spokesperson. Abu Ubaidah is the Hamas spokesperson. The person that they killed is Abu Hamza, who is a Palestinian Islamic Jihad spokesperson. Yeah. They used the ceasefire to make lists of the children and relatives of anyone who posted about the genocide on Twitter. Now they're executing every one of them, says Izzy. Israel killed my sister and her children tonight, along with her entire family. Israel may kill us at will, burn us alive, and tear us apart, but it will never succeed in uprooting us from our land, says Rami Abdul. Justice and accountability await no matter how long it takes. Okay, I agree with you 100%, but couldn't Hamas just release all the hostages so Israel does not have that defense anymore? What are we talking about? What do you mean Israel doesn't have that defense anymore? Israel doesn't need any defense. It's doing a genocide right now. It's doing a genocide in spite of the fact that there are literally already hostages, Israeli hostages, inside of Gaza. Israel doesn't care about those hostages. That is a ridiculous assessment to make. What leads you to believe that Israel cares about the hostages? They're killing the hostages themselves. They're starving the hostages themselves by refusing to let in humanitarian aid. Israel is killing its own hostages, sometimes directly with small arms fire, as they did to the 3 hostages that were waving the white flag. And other times they're, bombing them. They've done this consistently. YouTuber Swiftor found 3 hours ago that his cousin's family was killed by Israel. Oh my God. The quicker people recognize that Israel's ultimate goal here is genocide, the easier this conversation will be for many of you. I think a lot of people still don't want to believe that like America's close ally would ever be so openly, so actively doing an ethnic cleansing campaign. You know, it's just that's the reason why you ask these questions where you're like, I don't understand. Like Hamas said that they would release all the hostages on October 9th. They said they would release all of the hostages on October 9th, 2023, as long as Israel basically followed the current ceasefire, three-phase ceasefire proposal. Like they had a hard line that was not dissimilar to the current ceasefire proposal that has been that was supposed to be implemented. Now Yemen is saying that there are no more red lines. Syed Abdul Malik al-Houthi has just declared in a televised speech that there are no red lines anymore, that Israel has crossed every boundary imaginable, and that Yemen will resume operations at the highest level of escalation to support the Palestinian people. Considering that they've been able to successfully penetrate the Israeli security boundary by sending in loiter munitions and even sending like hypersonic missiles, I suspect that that means that they're going to start dumping payload into Israel proper. Oh. It's or I don't know where this goes, you know? I mean, I do know where this goes. The reality of the matter is if Israel continues doing this, it eventually is going to implode due to the stress being put upon it from other regional actors. You know, that's where it's going to. That's where it's going towards. That's where it's heading towards. And for the record, ballistic missiles from Yemen have already been launched in close vicinity towards Israel's Dimona nuclear reactor. The missiles were all intercepted, and yet the air raid sirens were activated as a consequence of this. And this happened. This happened earlier this morning. So last night for them. It quite literally is. I mean, fascism and fascist ideology is a suicide cult. It cannot stand due to the glaringly obvious contradictions presented within it. Fascist ideology inevitably dies because it cannot be maintained. There's always an outgroup that you have to dominate. And when you eliminate the entirety of the outgroup, then you look within to dominate and make the group smaller and smaller and smaller, excising those who are on the outs of the newly formed, even smaller in-group. It's impossible to continue. It's impossible to continue behaving in a fascist way, even without resistance. I would go so far as to say that neoliberalism, without any sort of resistance, ideological resistance on the global stage from communism, in the aftermath of the USSR's dissolution, has led to America and the state of affairs now, income inequality that has grown overwhelmingly over the period of the past 3 decades at this point. America is also falling as a consequence of not having any sort of global competitors. America is failing because of its own success. And the same goes for Israel, whether it is Yemen resisting or ascetic groups in the region that are resisting against Israel's genocide and American imperial ambition. Without them or with them, Israel inevitably will fall apart due to its undying loyalty to implementing this fascist ideology. And that's where we're at. From an Israeli Telegram news channel with 66,000 subscribers, a Gazan girl who tried to be like Sinwar eliminated today. Notice the reactions. If this is the attitude that people have towards a little child that they eliminated with American weapons, I mean, this is a deep moral rot at the heart of Israeli society that will, it's just not healthy. I don't know how else to explain it. It's just not sustainable. Times of Israel correspondent says that the first strike from Yemen to Israel since January 18th, which goes to show that the Houthis are following the ceasefire. Yes, a ballistic missile launched at Israel by the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen was successfully intercepted by air defenses. There are no reports of injuries or damage in the attack. The IDF says the missile was shot down before crossing the country's borders. Sirens have sounded in Beersheba, Dimona, and numerous other towns in southern Israel. It marks the first Houthi attack on Israel since January 18th, right before the ceasefire took effect in the Gaza Strip. As in, Yemen 100% was following through on the conditions of the ceasefire. As a matter of fact, if you were watching closely, and you're never going to hear like Yemeni spokespersons on Western news, because it's important to keep repeating the lie that they are, these barbaric monsters who are just operating on anti-Semitism, and that's it.